Thank you, Speaker. I rise on behalf of the Greens and thank the 21,061 residents of New South Wales who have raised their voices and given their support for making travel concessions available to all students in New South Wales, to present this petition to the House and offer my long-held support for the idea that travel concession fairness and an end to the discrimination that is currently existing in New South Wales when it comes to travel concessions is something that absolutely can no longer be ignored by this New South Wales Labor government, particularly because this New South Wales Labor government is known to have more ex-student leaders from universities that would have joined campus petitions and actions in support of travel concessions when they were on university campuses, and they are now the Minister for Transport, the Minister for Housing, the Treasurer. I believe there are many student leaders that are now ministers in this government and have stood for years and years, decades in support of travel concessions for international students. Today, transport concessions are now more than ever costing a fortune for people who are studying. The cost of transport, the cost of housing, food, daily essentials is at an astronomical level, and with many facing a crisis. Students are often facing cost of living stresses that are higher and bigger than ever before, and I want to acknowledge that it is no easy feat to get a petition debate in this chamber, and you'll note those on the other side really don't want to listen because they're feeling very uncomfortable about the fact that they know that the right and just thing to do is to deliver transport concessions for international students. But no, when they're in opposition, they say they love it. When they're in student politics, they say they love it. But when they get into the government and they can finally make the decisions, ooh, it might cost a little bit too much. Well, let's just have a look at the costs that are here and what is available. Let us just look at the fact that we know that the contribution that international students and part-time students make to the economy of New South Wales is significant. International students and part-time students, they pay tax, they pay GST, they pay astronomical student fees to be able to study. And we know that part-time students, even if they are citizens of this country, often are not in a position to be able to study full-time because of the financial pressures on them, because of their caring responsibilities, because they're students with disabilities. Why should those students be discriminated against? And I use the term discriminatory very carefully because in 2006, and yes, I was also a student politician, and I was the president of the Sydney University Postgraduate Association, and the Sydney University Postgraduate Association took the New South Wales government to the NCAT, to the tribunal, to challenge the discriminatory policy that held, and the New South Wales Administrative Decisions Tribunal held that, and I quote, the long-standing policy of not providing full fee paying overseas university students with concessional travel on public transport services contravenes the Anti-Discrimination Act. It is discrimination. So, what does the then Labor government do? Oh no, they don't move to get rid of the discrimination in the Transport Administration Act. They carve out the Transport Administration Act from the Anti-Discrimination Act. They exempt the Transport Act from the Discrimination Act so that they can keep not allowing travel concessions to be paid be accessed by international students. More and more students are forced to reduce their study because of part-time workloads. We need to recognise that it is not just international students, but also part-time students who need to pick up an extra shift in their retail or hospitality job or have caring responsibilities who are also facing these financial pressures. It is not just the students that are in the chamber today that are calling for this. 21,061 residents of New South Wales supported it, and the Minister for Transport, who I note is in the chamber, and I appreciate her being in the chamber for this debate, will know that it wasn't just students that are calling for this as well. In fact, the New South Wales Vice-Chancellor's Committee wrote to the Minister in support of part-time student and international student travel concessions. Universities across New South Wales and their student organisations are in support of this change. In fact, indeed, the New South Wales Transport Minister herself, who, as I noted, was also a University of Sydney student president at one point in time, only a few years ago in a private member's statement in this chamber addressed us and said that the current model of transport concessions is outdated and unfair, and called for a system of public transport concessions that addresses the injustices of international students and part-time students. I acknowledge that the Transport Minister is supportive of that, and I hope that she will...
Call the member.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm rising to speak on this as Minister responsible for tertiary education in New South Wales. The Minister for Transport will also be responding to the petition and talking a little bit more about the cost pressures on the system and some of the actual issues around the transport concessions and the way they work. From my point of view, I want to emphasise for our international students how much New South Wales appreciates them. We very much appreciate the international students who come into our community, who bring with them their cultural diversity, who bring with them their experiences, and often take back home to their own country a knowledge of Australia, which is incredibly useful in developing the partnerships between our countries. It's something that I think is important to highlight at the moment, because there is a number of issues which are affecting international students in Australia at the moment, which I think are somewhat negative, and some publicity around them, which I think needs to be addressed with government talking about why we do value the presence of international students in Australia. I'll come back to that. Of course, the Minister for Transport and the member for Cessnock, I believe, from the government point of view, will talk a little bit about the way that we support students at the moment. And the reason why, while I think we would very much like to be able to extend transport concessions, there are cost pressures on government and budget pressures that make that difficult at the moment. So it is something which does have a significant cost, which I'm sure we will hear more about later. But of course, international students and part-time students are able to access the capped amounts for the Opal network for public transport in New South Wales, which is helpful. But I absolutely acknowledge that cost of living pressures apply just as much to international students as they do to every other student. And that goes through from the cost of food and accommodation. But what I wanted to, one of the things which I really wanted to highlight here is that we've seen some recent discussion in media which seeks to blame international students for things like housing shortages, and I think that's completely overblown. As somebody who thinks that it is really important that we do have international students in New South Wales, I want to express my support for the students who are coming back to New South Wales, particularly after the COVID disruptions that we saw to that. International students, according to the Property Council and the Student Accommodation Council's recent report, make up about 4% of the rental market. So it's hard to say that that's a driver. The real driver of accommodation problems in New South Wales and in Australia is poor policy over many years and a failure to plan. And I think that it's important for us not to be putting the blame onto people who actually have no say over those issues. As I said, we very much value the contribution international students make. I remember visiting a Chinese mining company in one of my previous portfolios in a previous incarnation, and meeting somebody who'd studied in Australia, and that really helped their understanding of how Australia worked and how the links could be brought together. So that's really important. And from the point of view of the New South Wales economy, international educational exports are our second biggest export from New South Wales. They are our biggest service export. They're absolutely vital. And it really concerns me as New South Wales Minister responsible for tertiary education that we're seeing some visa issues at the moment, which I think are unfairly impacting on some of our universities in New South Wales and unfairly impacting on some countries that are the source countries for our international students. And I'd really like to see the federal government, while I support their moves to make sure that people are coming for genuine educational reasons, that they are not seeing that carry across to our universities, which are excellent educational institutions, and carefully choose which students are eligible to come to Australia to make their contribution. So I'm very sympathetic to the issues that you're raising. I think the Minister for Transport will address them in some more detail, but I do thank you for your petition, which enabled me to address some other issues, and the member opposite for bringing it along to the Parliament.
And I call the member for Sydney.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I want to join other members in welcoming all of the students here and thank them for their leadership in getting this petition of over 20,000 signatures to the Parliament. It really demonstrates how this needs to be on the agenda of the New South Wales Parliament, and thank the member for Newtown for sponsoring the petition and speaking so strongly to it. And I want to also welcome international students to the state and to Sydney, and to call for their fair treatment in accessing essential transport services. The number of international students enrolled in New South Wales education institutions has been growing since the pandemic and reached over 220,000 in January, representing over a third of all international students in Australia. Most study in the city and in the inner south. International students are a vital part of our economy. They spend billions in student tuition fees, providing the main source of income for universities, vital to maintaining our world-class tertiary education system. Their contribution to the education sector is, of course, more than just financial, and includes the new perspectives and ideas they bring to class by the virtue of their diverse background, fostering innovation and research, and broadening the knowledge of all other students. International student programs help foster international relations between Australia and other countries. Many graduates will go on to be leaders when they return home, and if they have established relationships in Australia, it could help in political, economic, trade, and cultural negotiations. Furthermore, if students have a good experience, they are likely to return with their friends and family for a holiday, or even, hopefully, immigrate to Australia. The economic benefits of international students go beyond their contribution to the education sector. The ABS calculated the overall contribution to the New South Wales economy at over $13 million last financial year. As you know, international students work hard to fill jobs like in the food and beverage, cleaning and deliveries, and spend billions on rent, hospitality and retail. They also significantly contribute to their neighbours, with areas around education institutions vibrant, making areas around education institutions vibrant places at night as international students eat at local restaurants. In my electorate, this is especially the case in Pyrmont, Ultimo, Haymarket and the CBD. Students come from across the globe, including from China, India, Brazil, Colombia and Indonesia. My own husband came to Australia as an international student from Germany. Many international students come from families who have saved long and hard to give them the opportunity to study overseas in Australia, in New South Wales, in Sydney. Some going into debt to do this. Students who work are usually on the minimum wage, on limited hours, and much of their pay is spent on the high rents and other high living and student expenses. They are no more financially well off than local students. International students rely on public transport to get them to and from education, work and social activities. They are unlikely to have access to a car. Because of the rental crisis, if they are not successful in securing student accommodation, they often live far from their place of education. Yet New South Wales is the only jurisdiction in the country that does not offer any form of concession or discounted transport to international students, requiring them to pay full fares. Last year, Opal fares increased on average by 3.7%. The current adult weekly travel cap of $50 is now double the concession cap of $25. As contributors to our economy, our society, international students should be no less eligible for travel concessions than other students. It is discrimination to refuse them this basic subsidy. The City of Sydney recognises the significant value of international students and recently passed a motion in support of this petition, and I acknowledge the work of Councillor H.Y. William Chan on bringing that, and also the support of Councillor Sylvia Ellsmore as well. About 40% of all education providers in the state are located in the City of Sydney, including over 550 education establishments such as universities, vocational and educational training providers, and English language intensive courses. We want international students to have a good experience studying here, and we should help them avoid hardship in what is becoming one of the most expensive cities to live. The budget costs could be modest, especially after accounting the benefits international students with a good experience bring to our city. I thank the Students' Representative Council and the Sydney University Postgraduate Representative Association for creating this petition, and the member for Newtown for bringing it to this House. International students provide a massive contribution to our state, and I hope the government recognises their contribution and urgently extends transport concessions to them.
I call the member for Cessnock.
Thank you very much, Speaker, and I too rise to acknowledge the wonderful contribution that international students make to everything that happens around not just our universities but our societies at large. And obviously we've spoken about the soft diplomacy that flows on when our international students either spend more time here and end up being leaders of our local community, or whether they go home and become leaders in their local community and become a nice link back to this country. And in particular, I recognise those students who have been through Newcastle University, which is a little bit closer to home for me because I come from the Hunter Valley, and some of those students have had incredible success in their working life, and indeed one of them continues to make significant contributions back into that university now as an alumni and to fund scholarships, which is just fantastic and welcomed. Obviously, the nature of the petition is seeking to expand transport concessions to all tertiary students, including international students and part-time students. The current concession fare for eligible tertiary students is set at 50% of the adult fare, and also capped at $50 per week on the Opal public transport travel network. This approach is consistent in every state. Only the Northern Territory offers part-time or remote students access to concession fares on their public services in Darwin and Alice Springs. While there have been numerous requests to extend the concession fare to international students over the years, legislation has been in place for decades in New South Wales that restricts full fee-paying students from accessing the same concession fare as domestic students. This is because they are required to provide evidence indicating that they have sufficient funds to cover both their education and living costs as part of their student visa applications. The principles underpinning the public transport concession system in New South Wales is to ensure that the benefits of the concession fares are directed to those that are transport disadvantaged and or experiencing financial hardship. Each year, millions of dollars in public transport concessions are provided to assist people in those types of need. Currently, those that benefit from these public transport concessions include children, school students, domestic tertiary students, Centrelink beneficiaries, seniors, pensioners, people with disabilities, asylum seekers and war veterans. That includes specific support for tertiary students studying on Australian government scholarships, asylum seekers and part-time domestic students with disability. The New South Wales Government significantly subsidises public transport services, and those who cannot access travel concessions are able to access the same Opal benefits as other adult New South Wales residents, including unlimited travel on the network capped at $50 per week. However, public transport concession resources have to be targeted and prioritised. New South Wales is facing a significant economic challenge, and the state of the budget in New South Wales has been left in a dire and perilous state by the former government. Indeed, one of the things that wasn't done by the previous government, or wasn't done properly, was maintenance of our services, safety on our public transport lines in some instances. We had international contracted trains that don't fit the tracks. Some of them weren't properly fitted out with the safety portals that they needed. And there are a wide range of other problems with some of those contracts, which has added to the perilous state of the New South Wales budget. However, I note that there is currently work underway by the Independent Pricing and Regulatory Tribunal to review Opal fares. The Independent Pricing and Regulatory Tribunal is better known as IPART. IPART will be providing their draft report on new Opal fares in June 2024, and will be holding a series of public hearings that month to talk about what they propose. These hearings provide all members of our community with an opportunity to have their say on the pricing of public transport fares across the Opal network. Once IPART have made their determination on a new Opal pricing structure, there may be more capacity to consider where and how new concession fares could be offered. And to that end, I would encourage petitioners and advocates to contribute to that IPART process.
We're looking for another speaker before the Minister. Minister in reply.
Thank you, Speaker. And I think Jenny replies, but I want to thank everyone who has signed this petition, in particular thank the member for Newtown for bringing it to this House. Look, I really want to acknowledge the passion and the strength of feeling amongst those advocating for reform, and I also want to thank many members of this place, colleagues who have raised this issue with me in recent weeks. I also acknowledge that international students, that tertiary students are experiencing the same cost of living pressures that we all are, and that places significant pressure on them and the way that they need to study, work and live here in New South Wales. As the Minister and the member for Cessnock outlined, look, our government is facing significant budget pressures. We were elected with a $188.2 billion debt, and we have increased pressure with the reduction in GST revenue from the Commonwealth Grants Commission. Look, these are difficult times with difficult choices, and in transport, we inherited a mess, a system that was failing passengers, was failing everyone. And so at this time, our focus does need to be on improving those services, on expanding the frequency and reliability of transport services and the resilience of our network. Now, that is to the benefit of everybody, and we need to make sure in particular we are supporting our frontline workers to provide these essential public transport and other services that we all rely on. Now, Speaker, the rationale for the approach for international students' concessions is that under immigration requirements, international tertiary students are required to demonstrate they have enough funds to support both their tuition and living expenses when applying for a student visa. Part-time domestic tertiary students and students who undertake study externally or by correspondence can undertake additional employment hours while studying, but I acknowledge that the restrictions placed on working hours of international students makes that very difficult. Look, I want people to understand that we have provided significant subsidy for fares for people on fixed and low incomes, ensuring that some of the most vulnerable people in our community have access to public transport. This includes a 50% concession on the adult fare accessed by apprentices, trainees, students and young people. International tertiary students on scholarships are fully funded by the Australian Government through the Australian Award Scholarships and are entitled to access tertiary student public transport concessions. Look, we want to make sure, including people with disability, that can access those concessions, and as previous speakers outlined, we retain the $50 a week cap that international students and part-time students can access. Look, taxpayers subsidise the operation of public transport in New South Wales, and the IPART has showed that we only collect 25% of that revenue. Speaker, while my time is brief, I would conclude by saying, while we are not able to extend travel concessions to international students and part-time domestic students in the current budget environment, I certainly wouldn't rule out working with you in the future on this important issue. Thank you.
And I apologise, the Minister is in response, and I call the member for Newtown in reply.
Thank you, Speaker, and I want to acknowledge and thank again the 20,061 students and individuals and residents of New South Wales who signed this petition to bring this debate. And I want to say that there are many members here in the chamber and also watching who have raised with me and obviously raised with the Minister their strong views on how we need to address this issue in the state of New South Wales. I want to thank the members for Monaro and Minister for Skills, TAFE and Tertiary Education, the members for Cessnock and the member for Summerhill and Transport Minister for contributing to the debate. I also want to acknowledge the member for Sydney and acknowledge that my Greens colleagues, the member for Balmain and member for Ballina, who's our education spokespeople, are here as well. I want to also acknowledge that there are other members in the chamber that I know feel passionately about this issue, but I want to particularly take the time to acknowledge and thank Wei Hong Liang, the president of the Sydney University Postgraduate Representative Association, who has been coordinating this most recent iteration of the campaign, and acknowledge the University of Sydney SRC, the University of Sydney Union, the University of New South Wales Postgraduate Council, the Student Representative Council of UNSW, the UTS Student Association, the University of Newcastle Student Association, and the Western Sydney SRC, as well as the New South Wales Vice-Chancellors Committee and the NTEU, all who back this call for finally seeing an end to the discrimination against international students and part-time students when it comes to travel concessions in this state. I want to also acknowledge the fact that as an international student, taking the step to advocate for changes while you're in this country is a risk. It's a risk to you personally, and it takes an effort to do so, and it is a willingness that you do selflessly, knowing that future generations of international students will benefit from a change that you might not see. And I want to thank you for taking that brave step today. I want to acknowledge the work you've done, and can I say that from what we've heard today, the campaign to get international travel concessions finally delivered and for part-time students is not over, and we will continue this fight. So congratulations to you all, and well done.